Hello everyone, let's get on to finishing the chapter number 8 of Froyen, and the name of the chapter is The Classical Economics and the Keynesian Revolution. Now herein there is just one information, that watch these lectures if and only if you are preparing for economics as an optional for UPSC exam, because the details that we'll be going to study for this very chapter, and for that matter any other chapters, are not needed for any university exam. Therein only theories are asked and broad idea would suffice, but इतना ज़्यादा डिटेल में जो हमें चाहिए पढ़ने के लिए यूपीएससी ऑप्शनल के लिए, that is needed if and only if you're preparing for UPSC economics as optional. So do not unnecessarily take so much of a burden. So let's get on to it. So right now we are on to the 8.4 topic, wherein we are to study in the Keynesian system what is the variability in the money wage and what is its relation with the labor supply. So let's get on to it. Now intuitively, doesn't matter whether it's the classical system or the Keynesian system or no system, we know the supply of labor is a function of the real wage in the economy. People are not concerned with the money wage or anything, they are concerned with the purchasing power of their salary or the money wage that they are getting. So that's what we call in economics as the real wage. So this is point number 1, that the supply of labor is a function of the real wage, and there is no confusion or contradiction or arguments between classical and Keynesian here. Both agree on this very aspect, that yes, labor supply is a function of the real wage. But what sort of real wage? Actual real wage or expected real wage? Real wage means W upon P. So now let's get on to this particular thing. Classicals were of the view that labor or the people, they are very, very intelligent, and they know everything, and they are generally concerned with the real wage. So in the classical notion, in the classical system, labor supply is a function of the real wage, actual real wage. Money wage, either way, labor no. They also know the prevailing or the current prices in the system. So that's how W is to be divided with the current prices, and that's how we'll be getting the actual real wage. So classical notion is yes, that supply of labor is a function of actual real wage, because labor know the level of current prices in the economy. That's point number 1. But Keynes was of the view, or the Keynesian notion is that labor do not know the level of the current prices prevailing in the system, so they are rather into the expected price level, and this is either way correct. Right now we do not know in general what is the level of inflation in the economy. It might be the case that it was somewhere around 3 to 4% in the past 6 months, and we just think of that to be prevailing right now as well. So we are generally into the expected prices in the economy and not the actual prices. So this is the Keynesian idea, that yes, definitely supply of labor is a function of the real wage, but it is the expected real wage, that is money wage W divided by the expected price level. And the next important point is that what is these expected price level? Are they forward looking or are they backward looking? So Keynesian version is that they are backward looking. Why are they backward looking? It's because people, they have the expectation that they develop based on the past behavior of the prices, and this is either way obvious. अगर हमारी इकॉनमी में लास्ट ईयर या पिछले 6 महीने से कुछ प्राइसेस चल रहे हैं, तो हमारा आज का एक्सपेक्टेशन, सपोज वी आर गोइंग टू गेट इन जॉब इन नेक्स्ट मंथ, एंड वी आर एडजस्टिंग और वी आर बार्गेनिंग फॉर आवर वेजेस, एंड व्हाट सॉर्ट ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन और प्राइस वुड बी कीपिंग इन माइंड while bargaining for the wages? Any future expected prices, or the prices that are right now there in the economy, or the prices that we think were there in the past and they are supposed to be continuing in the future as well? I think we will be more into point number 3. हमें ज़्यादा यही लगेगा कि अभी पिछले 6 महीने से 2-3% इन्फ्लेशन है, तो अभी आगे भी यही रहेगा. हमको करंट का भी नहीं पता होगा, और हमको इतना इन्फॉर्मेशन भी नहीं होगा कि हम फ्यूचर का एडवांस में ही डिसाइड कर पाएँ कि इतना इन्फ्लेशन रहेगा, राइट? सो बेसिकली इट्स द past behavior of the prices that make us say that this would be the expected prices, and that's what the Keynesian notion is. So we have studied 2-3 things here. So let's revise it quickly. So basically there is no confusion about this, that yes, supply of labor is a function of the real wage, but classical says that it's the actual real wage because laborers know what the prices in the economy are currently. Keynesians are of the view that definitely labor supply is a function of the real wage, but it's the expected real wage, and because laborers do not know what the current prices are, they are just expecting some prices to be true. And what sort of expectations? Forward looking or backward looking? Very, very important. It's the backward looking. It's the prices that are based on the past behavior of the prices. And this is a very important point because after finishing Keynes, we are to talk about next economist and the next school of thought. They are of the view that expectations are forward looking. So those are of the rationalist thought of school, rationalist expectations. But let's not deviate. So we are not supposed to talk about rationalist or anything here. It was just a deviation on my part. So let's stick to the whatever we're studying now. So it's simple. Past behavior of the prices, past expectation, it's the expected real wage. That's it. So with this understanding, let's proceed further. So now we are just to derive the aggregate supply curve, which is very, very simple. Let's talk about this thing now. We have first figure wherein it's the labor demand and labor supply. Let's say initially labor employment is at N0 because this is how the labor demand curve is and this is how the labor supply curve is. And we know, and rather I'm sure we have a very good understanding of the shapes of these curves and how exactly they would be shifting rightward or leftwards, because that's something that we've already studied. So now only one difference is here, that in case of labor supply curve, we are writing P0, PE in the bracket, that stating one thing, that this particular labor supply curve has been drawn based on this very expected prices. That's it. And these prices, they're not gonna change. In general, Keynes was of the view that in short run, the price expectations stays constant. I mean, this is indeed true. इतना जल्दी prices expectations बदलेगा नहीं. So yes, it's an assumption that for the short run, these expected prices stays constant. So based on this, we have derived our labor supply curve and we have given labor demand curve, and that's how money wage is W0 and the employment is N0, and we are at point here. Now let's say the demand for labor increases in the economy because prices have gone up, so it shifts rightward. Now what will happen? Alright, so now herein there is one very simple explanation that we are supposed to write if we are writing any college exam or university exam, because too much of explanation is of no use to us. As such, we can clearly see that if the demand for labor has gone up, then based on this diagram we have higher number of people getting employed. The employment goes up from N0 to N1. So combining it with the production function, will be getting higher level of output, that is Y1, and at the higher prices we are getting Y1 as our new point, and joining these 2 points we are getting upward sloping aggregate supply curve. That's it. But just because the kind of questions asked in our optionals are very, very difficult, for that very reason we are supposed to go in a little bit depth here. So let's get on to that, and with the patience try to understand those tiny things, because those are needed. I do. So this is going to be a deviation now, but we have seen lot of explanations, but that doesn't help us to solve the questions of optional. So पहला चीज़ तो इसमें हमको ये जानना है, there are certain assumptions here, as in why we are making the money wage as a variable factor in the Keynesian system. And even in case of classical also, the money wage was a variable factor. So what is the difference then? So just to be sure of solving the actual questions of exam, we are supposed to go into depth, which is a kind of boring thing for me as well to explain, but then this is how it is. So let's get on to it now, and how to proceed ahead. So let's assume that so either way, nothing to be assumed, prices have gone up from P0 to P1, it's either way obvious. And what is going to happen in next? So basically, Keynesians were of the view that price expectations stays constant. Had it been the classical economics, then what would have happened? Because the prices have gone up, and prices expectations are based on the current prices. So price 2 would have gone up, that would have shifted the money labor supply curve leftwards, and money wage 2 would have gone up. Classical का तो simple है, prices बढ़ा अगर 5% तो wage भी बढ़ जाएगा 5%, और that's how real wage would stays constant. Alright, but here in Keynesian we are clearly seeing that just because expected prices stays constant, so new equilibrium is as point here, right here where the cursor is, and at this particular point even money wages have gone up. But there is a little difference. The rise in money wage is not to the full extent of rise in the prices. Rise in money wage is less than the rise in prices, so that the real money wage has fallen. I hope this is clear. अगर prices 10% बढ़े हैं, so if the prices have gone up, let's say to the extent of 10%, then wages would go up to the extent of only 5%, so that real expected wage rate would decline. And that's the reason why employment in the economy would go up. Employment तभी बढ़ेगा अगर employers को अभी कम wage pay करना पड़ रहा है, right? So this is the reason why in the classical system there is no change in employment, because real wage stays constant. But in the case of Keynesian, even though money wage is a variable factor, but the adjustment is not complete. The real wage still, the expected real wage to be precise, has fallen, and that's how we are seeing a rise in employment. These things gonna come handy in solving the questions that are asked. As such, it might be getting little confusing here, but this is really needed. Moving on to the next thing. So because employment has gone up, combining it with the production function, our output would go up to Y1, and that's how we'll be seeing the aggregate supply curve upward sloping, because at higher price we're having higher output, that's why it is upward sloping. That's it. Alright, now a question was asked which was on certain lines, as if like if we allow for more and more flexibility in the Keynesian assumptions, then Keynesian too are a form of classicals. So that is explained in variety of manners, and this also form a part of that very answer, that yes, if indeed we allow for flexibility as we have shown here, then gradually the Keynesian too can be like classicals. अभी ये चीज़ नहीं समझ आएगी because अभी तो हमारा first reading चल रहा है Froyen का. The point is that each and every word is important. Merely superfluously going through the diagram as if this has shifted rightwards and that's how it has gone up and gone down would not suffice. So that is the reason we are unnecessarily, although it's really needed, delving into so much of detail. So do not get impatient as if why we are necessarily lengthening the video. These things are needed, but the value of it would be understood only once we start solving the previous year question. So either way, I hope that these things are clear now. क्या हमने पढ़ा इस पूरे चीज़ में? यही कि अगर मनी वेज वेरिएबल फैक्टर है तो हमारा एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कर्व अपवर्ड स्लोपिंग होगा, because we have seen why. That's it. So let's not repeat that very thing again. So herein we are talk about one more thing, that what is the difference between the aggregate supply when we are having a case wherein money wage is fixed and then a case wherein money wage is flexible. So let's look at it now. So in the case number 1, let's say money wage is fixed. Does that make any difference in the aggregate supply curve? So let's assume that the money wage is fixed. So what's going to happen? This is our labor demand curve, that is marginal productivity of labor multiplied by prices, the value of marginal product of labor, or basically the labor demand curve. And this is our labor supply curve when the money wage is fixed. Now why exactly the supply curve is like this? Because I have already explained in the previous lecture that whenever we are to take money wage as fixed, then we are to take an assumption that labor supply is in excess capacity. So whenever there is increase in the demand for labor, then the entire demand would be fulfilled by the availability of labor in the economy. तो अगर पहले labor demand इतना था N0 and wage was W0, and when the demand for labor has gone up to the extent from here till here, then the entire demand would be fulfilled by the availability of labor supply. So we'd be having a new labor employment equilibrium at N1. So with given N1 and combining it with the production function, we are having the aggregate supply as Y1, and Y1 is here. So initially at P0 supply was Y0 with the change in price to P1, and when money wage is fixed, the output has gone up to Y1, and that's how we have gotten our aggregate supply curve, which is of this very shape. That's it. This is point number 1. Now let's assume that the money wage does not stay fixed, it is actually variable. So when it's variable and with the given increase in the money demand, what will happen? So definitely money wage is a variable factor, so it too would be going up, because अगर डिमांड लेबर का ज़्यादा है, सप्लाई उतना ही है, तो फिर वेज तो बढ़ेगा. वो बात अलग है कि expected real wage would still be coming down because adjustment complete नहीं है. If prices have gone up to the extent of 10%, then increase in wage would be only, let's say, 5%. So real wage would either way be going down, but as such there is increase in the money wage. So that's what making the money wage as a variable factor here. तो तब क्या होगा? So as we can clearly see in this very photo or diagram, that labor employment would be going from N0 to N1 hash, not to the extent that was there in case of fixed money wage. So herein, combining this very labor employment with the production function, our labor supply is just Y1 hash, and it stays right here. And if we are to join these 2 points, we'll be getting our aggregate supply with the W variable or money wage variable, which is steeper than the aggregate supply there was in the case of the fixed money wage. तो अगर money wage variable है तो हमारा जो aggregate supply आया वो steeper है उस वाले aggregate supply से जो fixed money wage के साथ था. Now why? This is just because prices are supposed to be equal to cost. This is intuitive explanation. If cost is going up, because wages are a cost to the firm, cost is going up, then you are supposed to charge higher prices, then only equilibrium would be maintained. So that's it. In case number 1, when wages were fixed, only the marginal productivity of labor was falling. So now imagine the thing, because I do not have anything to write it with. So in the case of equilibrium, marginal cost has to be equal to the marginal productivity. So prices has to be equal to the marginal cost has to be equal to the marginal revenue, and in perfect competition we know marginal revenue means prices. So long story short, prices are supposed to be the marginal cost. Now what is marginal cost? It's W upon marginal productivity of labor. This thing we have already studied extensively. Now when the wages are fixed, then with the increase in employment, price is equal to W upon marginal product of labor. Prices are P given, wages are fixed, but if we are hiring more workers, if we are increasing the supply, then marginal productivity of labor would go down. This is what the law of variable proportion is. तो denominator का value अगर कम हो रहा है, even though numerator is constant, it means overall value ऊपर जा रही है, so prices too would be needing to go up. This is what it is. So that's how when the wage was fixed, even though W was fixed, but when we are increasing the aggregate supply, prices were going up. That's it. But now even wages are not being fixed. तो न्यूमिनेटर का वैल्यू भी बढ़ रहा है, इवन W is going up over marginal productivity of labor is going down. तो डिनोमिनेटर कम हो रहा है, न्यूमिनेटर का वैल्यू बढ़ रहा है, तो ओवरऑल तो वैल्यू और ज़्यादा बढ़ेगी, तो हमें प्राइसेस को और ज़्यादा बढ़ाना पड़ेगा. सो दैट्स व्हाट मेक द aggregate supply curve in case of variable wages steeper. So that's it. That's how this very aggregate supply curve is steeper, and the first one wherein wages were fixed is the flatter. So that is really it, and if you haven't gotten over it, then I would urge you to please read Froyen on your own, and this thing would really be clear then. So this is it. This is the few things we have understood. They were really sort of boring, but then this is how it is. Slightly difficult if you are reading them for the very first time, and also there is asymmetric information here. It's slightly difficult to teach online when you do not know how much of whatever you are saying is getting grasped. So we have studied few things, and let's not revise them again, because I too would end up getting confused then. So let's get on to the next thing right away. So right now, or you can pause the video right now and try to read the Froyen on your own so as to have a better understanding. So let's get on to the next point, which is this thing we have already studied, and conclusion matters. कि अगर prices, अगर wage fixed रहेगा, either way labor aggregate supply would be going up, but that would be flatter. अगर wages variable हैं, तो that again aggregate supply would be upward sloping, but that would be steeper. And why? That thing we have studied. Now let's get on to, now this paragraph is extremely important, and because question was indeed asked, and this paragraph is gonna give us better understanding of what is the relationship between the ISLM model, the Keynesian version of the money wage fixity, and the classical version. So I really am not going to explain this thing now, because it's going to be too much for us to understand. So right now, just try to have a complete hold over up till this much only. That's it. Try to understand it properly, and then onwards read this paragraph and then grasp it properly, and then move on to this particular thing. And it's really simple. The 8.5 exercise is quite simple, and we'll be covering this quickly now. It is basically about the effects of shifts in the aggregate supply schedule. बस last चीज़ है कि the ISLM model should be at the tips of our fingers. ऐसा नहीं कि पढ़ने बैठे तो अब याद ही नहीं आ रहा ISLM model में क्या था aggregate demand और क्या था aggregate supply, right? So that it's gonna not serve, it is not going to serve any purpose if we end up forgetting the things. So revise them again and again. So enough of lectures. So let's get on to the 8.5. The effects of shifts in the aggregate supply schedule. Very simple, nothing difficult here. We know that aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. Aggregate demand shift rightwards, तो क्या होगा, तो prices भी बढ़ेंगे और output भी बढ़ेगा. This is how it is. This is purely simple and very easy to understand, and let's not deviate too much. Let's get on to this. That what will happen if there is shift in the aggregate supply. So let's say this is the aggregate demand, this is aggregate supply. If there is leftward shift in the aggregate supply, then prices would go up and income would fall. This is little difficult and something not intuitively understood at first instance, of course, because ये तो समझ आता है कि अगर aggregate demand बढ़ रहा है तो demand is more than the supply, so prices would go up and so would the aggregate income or equilibrium income. Lekin this is slightly difficult to comprehend, because herein the prices are going up, and ideally increase in prices, they serve as an incentive for the entrepreneur to increase their output. The output should actually be going up in the economy, but exactly opposite is happening here. Despite increase in prices, aggregate output is going down. Why? So that why part we are supposed to understand here. Number one is what caused a shift in the aggregate supply curve, a rightward shift, a leftward shift. So herein we just have to understand that apart from labor or the wage acting as a cost to the firm, there are certain other costs as well. It could be any raw material cost. So let's say the price of the raw material has gone up all of a sudden. So what would happen? We know in the equilibrium the prices are supposed to be equal to the cost. Now nothing has happened, everything is the same, just all of a sudden the price of the raw material has gone up. So just to make sure that equilibrium in the economy is maintained, the producers, they also need to increase their prices, as simple as that. So if they want to keep their output as constant at Y0, then they are supposed to sell that very output at a higher price, because the cost of production has gone up, because the cost of raw material has gone up. So that's how aggregate supply curve would be shifting upward. But at the same very time, if they want to keep the prices constant, they don't want to change their prices, then how to make sure that equilibrium is there in the economy? So we know price is equal to wages upon marginal product of labor. Now instead of wages, we can write cost of any other factor as well. It could be oil or any raw material. So either way, W, or let's say price of raw material, has gone up, but we don't want to change the prices of the goods here that are to be sold. Now what to do? Somehow we are supposed to make sure that marginal productivity of labor increases, क्योंकि अगर price is equal to W upon marginal productivity of labor, W हमको change नहीं, W either way has gone up, और हमको प्राइसेस को नहीं बढ़ाना, तो ऐसा कर सकते हैं कि डिनोमिनेटर को कम करें. फिर डिनोमिनेटर कैसे कम होगा? वी हैव टू मेक श्योर दैट मार्जिनल प्रोडक्टिविटी ऑफ लेबर गोज़ अप. एंड हाउ दैट गोज़ अप? बिकॉज अगर हम थोड़े से लेबर को निकाल दें काम से, तो जो बाकी बचे होंगे एज पर लॉ ऑफ वेरिएबल प्रोपोर्शन, उनका प्रोडक्टिविटी फिर ज़्यादा होगा. सो इफ़ वी आर डूइंग दिस, इट मीन्स वी आर opting for lesser and lesser number of labor in the employment market, and that's how अगर एम्प्लॉयमेंट में लेबर का एम्प्लॉयमेंट कम है, तो फिर प्रोडक्शन फंक्शन के साथ उसको कंबाइन करने पे दिस इज़ हाउ एग्रीगेट सप्लाई वुड बी गोइंग डाउन. सो इफ़ initially labor employed were N1 and this was the aggregate supply, so labor employment has gone down to N0 because we want to increase the marginal productivity of labor. That's how with a given production function the output would be falling to Y0. So that's how if we don't want to change the prices, we want to keep the prices as constant at P0, then we have to opt for withdrawal of the workers from the employment market, and that's how output would be going down to Y2. Now again, this much explanations, values is not gonna be understood now, because either way it's quite self-explanatory कि अगर supply leftward जा रहा है तो ये तो ऐसे ही होगा. But then the questions asked are tricky, and that was the reason we have to understand these nitty-gritties. We don't want to change the prices, then why do we need to do this? So this and that. So just try to understand is as it is, and you will understand it much better once you start solving the previous year questions. So let's get on to the next thing now. So this is point number 1, that what can cause a leftward shift in the aggregate supply curve. So yes, the sudden change in the prices of the raw material, this is point number 1. But there is one more point here which Keynes has explained, that when there are changes in the expectations on the part of the labor, we know that given supply curve of labor is based on an expected prices, let's say P0. Now suppose nothing in the economy has happened, all of a sudden labor's of the view that the prices in the economy are going up. Nothing has happened, this is just an assumption. They are out of nowhere are into believing that expected price in the economy has gone up. Then what would happen? For given money wage, they would be willing to offer less of their work, because expected prices have gone up, so expected real wage has gone down, so they would be willing to offer less of their work. Alright, so we could be somewhere over here at the given money wage rate. But because we know at this very wage rate, the demand is higher than the supply because supply curve shift leftward. So given money wage, this is our supply and this is our demand. So this much gap is there. So this would put upward pressure onto the money wage. So there would be movement along the money labor supply curve because money wage is going up. And at the same very time, because money wage is going up, there would be movement along the leftward movement along the demand curve of labor. So new equilibrium would be right here. तो अभी इधर adjustment complete हो गया. So at this new equilibrium we are having the level of employment at N1. So again what would happen, combine it with the production function with the given employment at N1, the output would have fallen to Y0. So prices are constant at P0. Nothing has happened to prices. Prices are P0 here and P0 here. Still, just because expectations of the labor has changed, the aggregate supply curve is shifted leftwards. That's it. So two causes we have studied behind the leftward shifting of the aggregate supply curve. Now let's combine these two factors, which is right here. Keynes was of the view that these two things, they work together because there was a lot of unsolved answers onto how could there be this weird relationship between the prices and the output, as if prices are going up and still the output is falling. Ideally should have been the other way around. Increase in prices mean higher output. So that is the explanation. So right here, so initially because of sudden increase in the prices of raw material, we are seeing a leftward shift in the aggregate supply curve. So prices have gone up and the income has fallen, and we are right here. And nothing has happened to the expectations of the labor right now. But even though the expectations of the labor are backward looking, but ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा 6-7 महीने तक उनको भी समझ आ जाएगा कि अभी prices जो है economy में वो बढ़ गए हैं. So they would be revising their expectations. The moment they revise their expectations, so herein, instead of labor supply curve as here, it's the aggregate supply curve which has been derived from the labor supply curve, and expectations of the prices was P0E. But once the labor have revised their expectations, then the labor supply curve would have shifted leftwards, and the new labor supply curve based on a new price expectation is P0, and that's how we arrived at a new aggregate supply curve. तो पहला शिफ्ट हुआ प्राइसेस की वजह से, जो रॉ मटेरियल का प्राइसेस बढ़ा. दूसरा शिफ्ट हुआ एग्रीगेट सप्लाई में बिकॉज ऑफ द रिवाइज्ड एक्सपेक्टेशंस ऑफ द लेबर with regard to their prices. So that's how this shift is there, and that's how this thing has been explained, that why exactly despite the prices being going up, still we are seeing the lower and lower level of output in the economy. So that's it. So we are done. This is just the conclusion, Keynesian versus classics. और ये तभी समझ आएगा अगर आप बाकी सब चीज़ों को अच्छे से याद किया हुआ है. Everything is at the tips of our finger, whatever we have studied up till now. So conclusion I'm not gonna explain because conclusion itself means we have understood everything. So try to read this book on your own and try to read the conclusion also. And still, if you haven't gotten over anything, then do let me know in the comment section and we'll try to solve that. Coming to, there were certain doubts with regard to one thing, that why exactly the value of the tax multiplier is less than the value of the government expenditure multiplier. Now herein, it's just a pure math. We have derived the multiplier as such. The tax multiplier is basically minus b upon 1 minus b, and government expenditure multiplier is 1 upon 1 minus b, and b is the marginal propensity to consume. Now you can take any value of the b, let's say 0.25, and try putting it into the respective formulas. तो ऐसा हो सकता है कि अगर 1 upon 1 minus b को 0.5 भरा तो वैल्यू आया 5. अगर वही minus b upon 1 minus b में भरा तो वैल्यू आया 4. It's a pure maths. So I do not think this is the confusion. Maybe confusion is with regard to the fact that how intuitively this could be true, that why the value of tax multiplier is less than the value of the government expenditure multiplier. Now this thing I've already explained, but just for the sake of explaining, I will be explaining it again So it's as simple as that. Let's say government has taken 100 rupee from us as taxes. तो अगर government हमसे 100 rupee tax में ले रही है, so the tax as such becomes 100, right? And what would be its impact onto the equilibrium level of income? Would it be to the tune of the full extent of rupees 100? So, like, we do not know. Let's say we do not actually know that value of the tax multiplier is less than the value of the government expenditure multiplier. We do not know any such technical detail. We have to understand this thing intuitively. So basically, what is the multiplier? It is simply anything that impacts the aggregate output in the economy. So if taxes are being taken from us, how it's gonna impact the output in the economy? So it's gonna impact like this. Basically, out of those 100 rupees, we must have spent some 60-40 into consumption, and consumption is a part of aggregate demand, and that's how we would have increased the output in the economy. That's point number one. Now, just because those 100 rupees have been taken from us, now we no longer can use that money to opt for consumption. So we'll not be having anything related to aggregate demand, right? This is point number one. So what to do now? So basically, government gonna be using that entire 100 rupees onto buying goods and services. अगर वो पैसा हमारे पास होता तो हमने उसका 100 में से कुछ सेव करना था, कुछ कंज्यूम करना था. जो कंजम्पशन वाला पार्ट है वही एग्रीगेट डिमांड का पार्ट बनता और वही हमें आउटपुट देता, इनकम देता, राइट? अभी वो हमसे ले लिया गया गवर्नमेंट ने, तो गवर्नमेंट ने वो 100 के 100 यूनिट्स को एग्रीगेट डिमांड में कन्वर्ट किया और हमें इनकम हुआ मल्टीप्लायर इम्पैक्ट के अकॉर्डिंग, राइट? सो दैट्स द क्रक्स. दैट्स हाउ द वैल्यू ऑफ द टैक्स मल्टीप्लायर इज लेस देन द गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर मल्टीप्लायर, बिकॉज इन केस ऑफ टैक्स मल्टीप्लायर वी आर ओनली concerned with that part of a taxed amount which would have gone into the consumption. That is just maybe 60 rupees out of 100, and other 40 would have gone into saving, and saving has nothing to do with the aggregate demand or to the employment or to the income. And the moment those 100 gets gone into the hands of the government of India, entire 100 becomes part of consumption. So that's it. This is the reason why the value of the government expenditure multiplier is more than the tax multiplier. So simple ही है. I really am hoping that this thing is getting clear, and this could be one of the reasons that maybe I'm not being able to explain it really well. So that's it. Still, if you haven't gotten it, then do let me know in the comment section. I'll try to search some videos onto the internet and try to provide its link if I'm not being able to convey this thing really well. So either way, we are done, and if there are any further doubts, then do let me know in the comment section. I'll try to explain that as well. So we are done. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.